because the God that our neighbors believe in is essentially an invisible person. He's a creator deity who created the universe to have a relationship with one species of primate. Lucky us. and he's got galaxy upon galaxy to attend to, but he's especially concerned with what we do, and he's especially concerned with what we do while naked. He almost certainly disapproves of homosexuality, and he's created this cosmos as a vast laboratory in which to test our powers of credulity. And the test is this: can you believe in this God on bad evidence, which is to say on faith? And if you can, you will win an eternity of happiness after you die. And it's precisely this sort of God and this sort of scheme that you must believe in if you're going to have any kind of future in politics in this country. No matter what your gifts. I mean, you could be an unprecedented genius. You could look like George Clooney. You could have $1 billion, and you could have the social skills of Oprah, and you are going nowhere in politics in this country unless you believe in that sort of God.
I do spend probably a little bit more time than I should on religion, and I have a certain amount of hostility to it. I think the most rational reason for it is because of the harm that I see it does. We were talking about that earlier. Many people do simply awful things out of sincere religious belief, not using religion as a cover, the way Saddam Hussein may have done, but really because they believe that this is what God wants them to do. Going all the way back to Abraham being willing to sacrifice Isaac because God told him to do that. Putting God ahead of humanity is a terrible thing.
But they will stand up and they will ask, if there is no God, what stops you from raping and killing everyone you want to rape and kill? What stops you from doing that? And my answer is always, you're absolutely right. I have raped and killed every single person I wanted to rape and kill. And that number is 0, you evil motherfucker! It's 0! It's a goose egg! And if your number is a positive integer, sign up for prison! Get the fuck out of our society! Because morality is more important than God, and we know that because you stupid motherfuckers say the sentence, God is good. And if morality is not more important than God, you don't get to say that. It doesn't mean anything. Unless there's some good that we believe in, some morality, then you can't say God is good. Then you just say God, whatever he does is okay. And according to the Bible, it kind of is. He does everything bad.
The God of the gaps argument has always been used to provide a place for God. The idea is that if science can't explain something, then maybe we need to reintroduce God. That's been historically the reason why people even talked about God. God was always an explanation for the things they didn't understand. Now, I don't claim that we understand everything, but we can give a plausible explanation for every question of this sort, rather than the gaps increasing, as he was urging. I claim that the gaps have pretty much disappeared. Not that, again, we can explain everything, but we have a plausible explanation, and that's why I wanted to give some detail into that scenario for the natural origin of the universe. Also give you some idea of how the laws of nature could come about. So I think that the fact that God is not needed, we have We have a natural explanation for the universe, for everything that we know. In no place do we have to put God into the picture. So there's absolutely no reason to even introduce the concept of God. It's a meaningless concept. It has not only no evidence, there's no basis for it. And the universe looks just like it should look, because there is no God.
In the God delusion, I made a 7-point scale. 1 is I'm totally confident there is a God. 7 is I'm totally confident there is not a God. 6 is, to all intents and purposes, I'm an atheist. I live my life as though there is no God. But any scientist of any sense will not say that they positively can disprove the existence of anything. I cannot disprove the existence of the Easter Bunny, and so I'm agnostic about the Easter Bunny. It's in the same respect that I'm agnostic about God.
Here's just one. There are many examples of the way the Christian God has been defined which cancel themselves out. For example, God is defined as a being with free will who knows everything. He knows the future. God not only knows the past, and I'm assuming this is the kind of definition that you hold. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, because you haven't told us yet. But God not only knows the past and the present, but he also knows the future, which means he also knows his own future decisions. God knows what he's going to do tomorrow at 12 noon, because he's God. He knows everything. But if you know what's going to happen in the future, that puts some limits on your power, doesn't it? How can you be omnipotent and unable to change what's going to happen between now and then? And if you do change it, then you weren't omniscient. Something's got to give. You can't be omniscient and have free will at the same time. To have free will, whatever that means with humans, and maybe we do or don't, that's a different debate. But certainly if God has free will, it's a full libertarian free will, and he can do whatever he wants because he's God, right? If God has free will, then he can't know the future. If you know the future, you can't have free will, because the future is fixed. There's no period of indeterminacy between now and then where you could change your mind. I might decide I'm going to have coffee tonight after we go out, but I could change my mind in the meantime. I have freedom to make that choice. So if God is defined as a being with free will, who's omniscient, who knows the future, then that God is a married bachelor, and that God not only does not exist, that God cannot exist. And there are dozens of incompatible properties between God that show that by definition, mathematically, logically, the God you believe in cannot exist. Also, in order for any hypothesis to be veridical, meaning it can be true or false, it has to be falsifiable. There have to be things you can say about your hypothesis which, if true, would make it false. If we found a black polar bear, the statement, all polar bears are white, would be falsified, right? We haven't yet, which strengthens the hypothesis. So I would ask you, what kind of statements could be made which, if true, would prove theism false? If you can't do that, you don't even have, not only do you not have a coherent definition, you don't even have a coherent hypothesis of this being that you are arguing for. The second absence, and this is probably the biggest one, the second absence is the absence of evidence for a God. If there were evidence for a God, we would have seen it tonight. It would have been on the table. Jerry would have said, here's the evidence for a God, not evidence against evolution. That's just a gap.
Indeed, I believe people when they say that they have experienced miracles. I believe that they think that they have. I think I'm obliged to credit them if it comes to that. As long as they keep it to, if you like, if I can put it like this, modestly as I dare, to themselves. If I believe that I was saved because once a baby boy was born and before mutilated, made the extraordinary discovery that he'd escaped the female birth canal. Mother was a virgin, or at least her birth canal was only one way. That thus I was a sorry thing, by the way, religion's distaste for these regions, don't you find? And something to put you on your guard. Suppose I thought, okay, now I know that must prove his teachings are true, which it doesn't seem to me that they do, but suppose I did, and I'm going to be saved by it. I think that was a wonderful secret. It would make me happy. Should make me happy. Doesn't make people happy. They can't be happy until I believe it too. My children must be taught this stuff. No, sir, no ma'am, no day, no way, no shape, no form. You keep your illusion private. And I hope it does make you happy, and there's perhaps some reason why it would. But we're told the Pope's authority to say you can't have a condom comes from his ability to certify a miracle, a disturbance in the natural order. I think it was David Hume who put it slightly vulgarly. This was again about the virgin birth, I think. Which is more likely, that the whole natural order is suspended, or that a Jewish minx should tell a lie?
Back in the 1600s, Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia carried on a correspondence with René Descartes, who was trying to defend mind-body dualism. And Elizabeth demanded to know, how could something immaterial like the soul affect something material like the brain or the body? Descartes was never able to answer that question, and these days, science has gone way beyond that. We know a lot more about what is happening. We can literally see memories being formed. We can see the chemical changes in neurons. So the soul is supposed to also have memories. How do the memories get from the neurons to the soul? We know that brains often have false memories in them. Does the soul in the afterlife carry those false memories, or are they somehow corrected after death? We even know the laws of physics by which the atoms, the electrons, the elementary particles in our brains behave. We know the equations that the electrons that are responsible for chemistry obey. And there's no ambiguity in these equations. They could always be wrong. It's always possible to say, well, we just don't know what is going on. That's fine. But what we have is the evidence of every experiment ever done telling us that these equations are correct. To overcome that, we would need very, very strong evidence. Just one experiment telling us how the soul is pushing around the chemicals in our brain, but we don't have that. What science says is that life, or consciousness, is not a substance like water or air. It is a process, like fire. When you put out the flame on a candle, the flame doesn't go anywhere, it simply stops. And that is what happens when we die. So we're faced at the end with two scenarios. One scenario says that everything we think we understand about the behavior of matter and energy is wrong, in a way that has somehow escaped notice by every experiment ever done in the history of science. And instead, there are unknown mechanisms that allow information in the brain to be transferred to blobs of spirit energy that persist after we die and can talk to the other blobs of spirit energy, but don't talk to us, except sometimes they do. The other scenario says that physics is right, and that people under stress sometimes have experiences that are not actually real. On the basis of rationality, it is not a difficult decision to choose between these two options. On the basis of emotion, it might be difficult, but we need to have the courage to live life here in the actual world. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Carroll.
Islam is not a religion of peace, and I woke up to the facts on the 11th of September 2001. Perhaps I should have woken up to the facts earlier, but I admit that I did that then at that time. Talking to people of my faith, Islam, and my friends, and discussing with them, I remember all kinds of fallacious arguments, but I remember one consistent thing, and that was to exempt Islam from any criticism. It was culture, it wasn't Islam. But a religion is born in a culture, and if that culture is not peaceful, then that religion is not peaceful. I was told it's politics. We've heard it tonight many times. It's not the religion. But Islam not only has a pious dimension, but it also has a political dimension, a complex system of laws, a political philosophy on how society should be organized. And if you look at that political system, it's anything but peaceful. What emancipated me from the order to submit my will completely to Allah, which in practice means the concentration of power in the hands of a few, was to learn to think critically, the Enlightenment. Vote against this motion and open up the flows of Islam for debate in order that Muslims, those who are not yet emancipated, may take charge of their own reason, of their own faculty. Vote against the motion that Islam is a religion of peace, and toss that fallacy into the trash can of history. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Religions undermine respect for the only way of acquiring reliable information about the nature of the world. Religions encourage the pursuit of understanding by the contemplation of navels and the achievement of comprehension by adopting a variety of ways of stemming the flow of blood to the brain. They encourage scavenging hints about the nature of reality by the close analysis of those ancient, politically edited compilations of folk tales referred to as sacred texts. If you favor self-deception, then vote against the motion. If you consider that society is enhanced by honesty and by unbiased perception of the search for truth, then vote for the motion. Thirdly, religions undermine respect for evidence. Religions harm societies by disfavoring evidence in favor of faith, preferring mass hysteria, superstition, priestly authority, and the propagation of beliefs by cultural conditioning over controlled, careful, circumspect, public, unbiased inspection. If you consider that introspection and submission to authority mark the path to understanding, then vote against the motion. If instead you consider that truth is not arrived at by fanning the flames of a crowd's opinion, but by circumspect public scrutiny, then vote for the motion. Take it.
Within Islam, there is a procedure to alter the text according to modern society, which relies on logical analogies that are drawn from the real world and a logical process that is followed to reach its conclusion. How then does it block logical interpretations of the world around us?
Thank you. All religions pride themselves on developing analogies, normally after the truth has been discovered by scientists.
It seems to me that those people who have their faith, who believe so strongly in God, if they really believe strongly their God, they believe they're right, they believe that they occupy the moral high ground, they should be only too willing to sit down and put this not to the scientific test, but to the political, moral discussion test of talking about why they believe what they believe. And let's talk about, the main thing we want to talk about is what should we do? What's the moral course of action to take? And if that is to be a reasonable discussion, we have to take a few cards off the table.
Such as?
The faith card. We have to take the faith card off the table.
What do you mean take the faith card off the table? I mean, if one is a man of faith, one can't take the gene out.
Well, you know, Lucille says you're wrong. You know who Lucille is? She's a friend of mine. She's always right. I can't play that card in an argument. It's just rude of me to say, you know, Lucille says you're wrong. You say, well, who's Lucille? I say, well, a friend of mine, always right. End of the discussion.
But we're confronted today by people who say they know the mind of God.
And I think
I
think the way we should deal with them is to say, well, that's very interesting, because now you've got a real problem. Since the rest of us don't know the mind of God, we can't share your direct line, so you're going to have to do the best you can in a secular discussion about what the right thing to do is. Are you up to the task of explaining to the rest of us who don't have your hotline to God why you're right?
It's a great disappointment of the last 14 years has been that civil society has failed, that we can't do the things to the Islamists that we would do, as I referred to the neo-Nazis. You know, we just not, it seems we're not set up for it, or people don't have the guts and the balls for it. They just, you know, they fear being called a name more than anything. And, you know, the thing I've always said is, we'll win when an Islamist who is not breaking the law but is saying horrible and hateful things is treated in the same way that Nick Griffin is treated. That's when we'll win. You know, because we all recognize he has a right to freedom of speech and so on and so forth, and if he's not breaking the law and it's a legal party and so on. But, you know, we don't invite him to loads of places. The Quakers don't host Nick Griffin, you know, to have Q&A sessions. You know, the Methodist Church doesn't celebrate the political thought of Nick Griffin. You know, the Anglican Church doesn't have hymn sheets that promote things that Nick Griffin thinks. Of course not. We know what to do with those types of fascists. But societally, we've totally failed to understand, to even recognize, and then to deal with this type of fascism. It's a magnificently terrible failure, and we're reaping the rewards. So we have to wake up to this.
Human civilization began by putting purpose and intelligent purpose behind gods associated with the sun, the moon, the planets, the wind, the earth, the oceans. It's been, by one estimate, over 1,000 different gods throughout human history. Mars, god of war, Poseidon, Thor, all the rest. And the really important thing is that all of you, or almost all of you probably, are now atheists regarding those gods. The only difference is it's just one that we may disagree about. But 999, we all agree, have been thrown out. And the reason they've been thrown out is they've been buried by the rise of our physical understanding. Science works. And the fact that science works has buried the gods of the wind and the sun and the moon. Farmers now, as I was just saying, when it doesn't rain, they don't pray for rain anymore. They go see a meteorologist. And that's a good thing. In the process, the human condition has improved immensely, and it will continue to improve as science continues to bury the one remaining God. Now, this one God is supposedly left. We might ask a priori or in advance, how likely is it in advance that all those other 999 gods were false, but this one's true? Well, you might argue if you had a flat prior that it's probably pretty small likelihood. But it doesn't really matter. The point is that our current understanding of nature has changed. We've learned things. It's changed and developed since the claims were made by Iron Age peasants who didn't even know the Earth orbited the sun. And therefore, it's natural that science is inconsistent with those claims based on ignorance. And we shouldn't revere those ancient claims as sacred. They're ignorant. There's still many open questions. I'll try my 10 seconds of humility. It'll be the only time tonight. There's a lot we don't know about the universe, a lot more we don't know than we do. That's the wonder of science. That's why I'm a scientist. But it is intellectually lazy to just stop asking questions and stop looking for physical explanations and just say God did it.
There were a number of things that really bothered them. Number one, they were ticked off that I kept saying, I don't know. They have this mindset that programmed them as to what to expect in this debate. We're claiming God exists and God did it and this is the answer. And you're here to say that that's false and there's some other answer. And if ever they asked things like, do you have an explanation for consciousness? No. You don't? Well, tell me how this happened. I don't know. I'm not convinced any of us know. You're the one claiming to have an answer. Would you like to provide the evidence and the argument to support your actual answer? And if I find it compelling, then I'll agree with you. But my lack of an answer doesn't make your answer correct. This is the mindset of the creationists that go through and try to poke holes in evolution. And even if they poked holes so much that evolution ceased to be a concrete theory, they're not one step closer to proving creationism is true. And they got mad. By the third night, I think, Israel, the gentleman I was debating, said, well, every time we ask Matt a question, he just says, I don't know, which is a bit of an exaggeration because there were a lot of things that I did provide my answers for. And the main preacher came up to me at one point and said, doesn't it bother you? Doesn't it bother? Are you happy going to your grave not knowing the answers to these questions? No, I'm not. None of us are. We are all uncomfortable with this idea of not knowing. And that's why we have science. That's why we go out and try to find what the actual damned answer is. It's not that I'm comfortable not knowing, it's that I'm more uncomfortable pretending that I know.
As a back-of-the-envelope calculation within an order of magnitude accuracy, we can safely conclude that over the last 10,000 years of history, there's been about 10,000 different religions and roughly about 1,000 different gods. Again, the house question for you, which side of the room you leave on tonight. What is the probability that Yahweh is the one true God in Amun-Ra, Aphrodite, Apollo, Baal, Brahman, Ganesha, Isis, Mithras, Osiris, Shiva, Thor, Vishnu, wanted, Zeus, and the other 986 gods are all false gods? You guys are atheists just like me, of all the gods I just rattled off. Some of us just go one God further.
And so what concerns me now is, even if you're as brilliant as Newton, you reach a point where you start basking in the majesty of God, and then your discovery stops. It just stops. You're kind of no good anymore for advancing that frontier, waiting for somebody else to come behind you who doesn't have God on the brain and who says, that's a really cool problem, I want to solve it. They come in and solve it. But look at the time delay. This was a 100-year time delay. And the math that's in perturbation theory is like crumbs for Newton. He could have come up with that. The guy invented calculus just on a dare, practically. When someone asked him, Ike, how come planets orbit in ellipses and not some other shape? And he couldn't answer that. He goes home for 2 months, comes back, out comes integral differential calculus, because he needed that to answer that question. And so this is the kind of mind we were dealing with Newton. He could have gone there, but he didn't. He didn't. His religiosity stopped him. And so we're left with the realization, of course, that intelligent design, while real in the history of science, while real in the presence of sort of philosophical drivers, is nonetheless a philosophy of ignorance. And so, regardless of what our political agenda is, all you have to say is, science is a philosophy of discovery, intelligent design is a philosophy of ignorance. That's all. I don't need to see have you discovered anything lately? If not, get out of the science classroom. But I'm not going to say, don't teach this, because it's real, it happened. So I don't want people to sweep it under the rug, because if you do, you're neglecting something fundamental that's going on in people's minds when they confront things they don't understand. And it happens to the greatest of the minds, as it happens to everyone else. Many, if not most other people in the public.
Y'all know who this girl is? Look at this child. Is this the face of a demon? Or is this the look of a skeptic who's not buying your bullshit? The problem is, it's the same glare either way. And that's why we're lumped in together. This is the way we look when we realize we're being lied to. When you realize that all of the fables in the Bible began in the hearts of superstitious primitives who just made it up. It's man-made mythology, and there is no truth in it. There's no heaven, no hell, no Eden either, and there is no devil. He was invented by Persians, adapted by Jews, and embellished by Christians. He was never the serpent, nor a fallen angel, and he can't steal your soul because we don't have souls. Exorcism isn't real, because demons aren't real, because magic isn't real. We are not cursed. We are not fallen. We have arisen, and we don't need salvation, because God literally doesn't give a damn what happens after you die, because then neither of you exist. There is no goddamn devil, because there is no God. Damn! You just die, and that's it. You're not immortal, you're not eternal, and to believe otherwise is to diminish everything that you really have. Life is precious because it is short, and there's nothing after it. There's no destiny, and there's no purpose beyond what you give it yourself. If you want your life to mean something, try making someone else's life meaningful. Thank you. Because regardless, whatever else you believe, history will be our judge. And stop waiting and wondering about some posthumous promise or divine damnation, and learn to live and love life.